Pre-algebra students, we are working with ratios and proportions. And to remind you, if you don't remember, a ratio is any comparison of two numbers provided that the second number is not zero. It can be written as a fraction, a over b. It can also be written as a colon, a colon b. We can also have three numbers in a ratio, a to b to c. So, I think about Starbucks. Starbucks has 12-ounce drinks, 16-ounce drinks, and 20-ounce drinks. And if you see, the ratio here is 3 to 4 to 5. So this is 3 times 4, this is 4 times 4, and this is 5 times 4. So I can get rid of that extra 4 and everything and see that the Starbucks drinks are in that ratio of 3, 4, 5. Just something to think about, that it doesn't have to just be two numbers. It can be multiple. But if it's multiple numbers, you can't write it as a fraction. And then a proportion is just an equation with those two ratios. So I know you've been working on these vocab terms, pre-algebra students. So here they are again. A ratio is a comparison of two numbers. Could be more than two numbers. And a proportion is just an equation that set those equal. Let's take a look at an equation you might need to solve. So I don't teach proportions the way most math teachers teach proportions. I'm going to teach this like I would teach any equation. First thing to do is to simplify. So notice that 5 over 10 can be written as 1 over 2. Now, a lot of my algebra, pre-algebra and algebra students can solve this now once I write that. But if you can't, just to show you, cover up what we're doing over here and just look what's happening to x. We're taking x and we're dividing by 16. I'm going to undo that division by multiplying by 16, but I have to do that to both sides. The 16s cancel here, and I'm left with x. That's why I did this. Over here, I get 16 over 2, or 8. And now I know that x is equal to 8. And many kids are able to get there at this step. Many kids need to do all the algebra, which is great. I don't teach what some books teach, which is cross multiply and divide. The reason I don't teach that here is you would get 80, that's 16 times 5, equals 10 times x, and then you get x equals 8. So you get the same answer. And cross multiply divide sounds nice. But the reason I don't teach cross multiply divide would be this. If I told you 5 over 10 equaled x over 16 plus 1/2, now you can't cross multiply and divide. You could get a common denominator over here, simplify, then cross multiply and divide, but that gets harder. So what I like to teach is, well, let's just get rid of everything. Let's just clear the fraction. And the way we clear the fraction is we multiply everything by the lowest common denominator. So the lowest common denominator between all of these terms ends up being 80. So, well, actually, before I do that, I'm going to reduce. 1/2 equals x over 16 plus 1/2. Now the lowest common denominator is 16. If I multiply everything by 16, I would get 16 times 1/2 equals, so that's 16 times 1/2. 16 times x over 16 plus 16 times 1/2. Here I get 8 equals x plus 8. I subtract 8 from both sides, and I get x equals 0. Now, you might have seen it here when I said 16 or x over 16 plus 1/2 equals 1/2. Some people might have said, wait a minute, the only thing you could add to 1/2 to get 1/2 is 0. So you may have gotten it there. Let's take a look at this proportion. One of the things that algebra students forget is that whenever you have a denominator, there's a parenthesis around this. We usually don't need it with the 3y, but I'll put it there. So this one, I'm going to multiply by the lowest common denominator. Since I have no idea what y plus 1 is or what 3y is, the lowest common denominator is just the two denominators together. That's the only number I know will clear this entire fraction. Now, when I multiply 1 over y plus 1 times 3y times y plus 1, and I multiply 2 over 3y, and I multiply that by 3y times y plus 1. What happens here is the y plus 1 cancels with the y plus 1. And here the 3y cancels with the 3y. And I get 3y equals 2 times quantity y plus 1. And if a middle school student were to be watching this video and they just turned it on right now, they would have seen that 3y times 1 is 3y, and 2 times y plus 1 is 2 times y plus 1. And they would have said, Stubbs, you cross-multiplied. I didn't, but that's what it looks like I did. When you multiply a proportion by the product of the two denominators, you will get the result of cross-multiplying. Like, that's what it's going to look like. That's where the name cross-multiply comes from. That's where they saw it. They said, oh, we'll just call it cross-multiply. But cross-multiply is not a thing. It's just a way to remember what to do. So when you multiply by the lowest common denominator, and that lowest common denominator just happens to be the product of these two denominators, then it will look like you cross-multiply. Distribute the 2, get 2y plus 2, subtract 2y, and you get y equals 1. So we're going to do some work with ratios and proportions. Lots of ratio and proportion work in algebra. So pre-algebra students, just trying to get you ready. Have a good night. See you tomorrow. Peace.